The title of my sermon is Strange Wives, and it's a strange title. Sounds like a soap opera or something. But I hope that by the end of the sermon, you guys will kind of get the gist of it. Our God is a God of mercy. And for some reason, there's this generalization that the Old Testament is a picture of God's wrath, and that the New Testament is more of a picture of God's love. And I think such oversimplifications do an injustice to this display of God's love in the Old Testament and the display of divine justice in the New Testament. God's story with Israel is not about a wrathful God who is eager to pour out judgment on a group of people. It is about a God who is eager to see his people turn away from their wicked ways and come running back to him. And countless times we see God put up with their nonsense. They would come back, realize the error of their ways, and after some time they'd fall off again. And then they'd come back after things got sour. And through all this time, from Exodus up until what I'm preaching about tonight, which is after the exile, God wanted nothing more than for Israel to just remain in his ways. And yeah, there were some good times, like I said, especially in Judah. They had some good kings, and they saw some period of success, and they saw prosperity in the kingdom when they were close to God. But overall, the nation of Israel struggled a lot. And this constant cycle of sin brings about the judgment of God, which is a fulfillment of the word. And I'm going to ask you to read from Leviticus chapter 18, if you can. I'm going to be reading out of 24 to 30, where it says, "Do not defile yourselves in any of these ways, because this is how the nations that I am going to drive out before you became defiled. Even the land was defiled, so I punished it for its sin, and the land vomited out its inhabitants. But you must keep my decrees and my laws. The native born and the foreigners residing among you must not do any of these detestable things. For all of these things were done by the people who lived in the land before you, and the land became defiled. And if you defile the land, it will vomit you out as it vomited out the nations that were before you. Everyone who does these detestable things, such persons must be cut off from their people. Keep my requirements and do not follow any of the detestable customs that were practiced before you, and do not defile yourselves with them. I am the Lord your God." So he warned them. This constant cycle, and then them being conquered and being exiled, didn't come out of the blue. There was many warnings. And this constant defilement of God's people eventually caused the judgment to fall on their heads. And they found themselves captive in Babylon for 70 years. But God, again, in his endless grace, gives them another chance to come back, to start fresh, a chance to turn away from their sins and to turn back to him. And I think that everyone who starts off as a Christian probably reads the word and thinks like, man, these Israelites are just the worst, man. Like, what's wrong with these people? And I was there. Like, they're so ungrateful. Like, how can they see all these things? How can they see God move? How can they see miracles, signs, and wonders? How can they see manifestations of his power, of his grace, but still reject him? But still turn away from him in lieu of whatever they want, whatever their flesh desires. And then I think every Christian also reaches the point where they grow a little and they realize, whoops, that's everyone, that's all of us. That's me, I was there. Like, Jesus saved me, he rescued me, he gives me eternal life, he gave me a chance. But there are times where I still reject him and I still turn away from him just because I want to do my own thing. And if you can't perceive what I'm getting at today, and if you didn't perceive the lyrics of these songs that are being sang today, God is speaking very clearly that it doesn't matter where you're at. because the Israelites did terrible things. And I have messed up so many times, both when I was away from God and in my walk with God. But it doesn't matter how far you feel from God, He is never far. He is always just a call away. And Paul says that there is nothing that can separate you from the love of God. So I want to ask you, how are you going to respond to that truth? I'm presenting you hope today. There is hope. How are you going to respond to that? To dive into the story, I'm going to start in Ezra chapter 9, and I'm going to read verses 1 to 5, just to give some context of the situation I'm going to be talking about. It says, after these things had been done, the leaders came to me and said, the people of Israel, including the priests and the Levites, have not kept themselves separate from the neighboring peoples with their detestable practices, like those of the Canaanites, Hittites, Perizzites, Jebusites, Ammonites, Moabites, Egyptians, and Amorites. They have taken some of their daughters as wives for themselves, and their sons have mingled the holy race with the peoples around them, and the leaders and officials have led the way in this unfaithfulness. I want you to highlight that part. And the leaders and officials have led the way in this unfaithfulness. When I heard this, I tore my tunic and cloak, pulled hair from my head and beard, and sat down appalled. Then everyone who trembled at the words of the God of Israel gathered around me because of this unfaithfulness of the exiles. And I sat there appalled until the evening sacrifice. Ezra takes place during a very interesting portion of Israel's history. See, after judgment was brought upon them by the Babylonians, they went into captivity for 70 years. The Persians then came and conquered the Babylonians. And God uses the Persian kings to allow Israel to begin to repopulate and rebuild their land. And in this book and in the book of Nehemiah, you will find the Israelites in difficult situations where they must pick up the pieces of the puzzle. And there are a lot of uncomfortable moments, including in this passage, where if Israel wished to be fully restored to these things, or to God, things needed to be addressed. Like I said before, God wished to grant Israel this chance to return to Him, because our God is unrelenting in His mercy and His love. God desires nothing more than for us to abide in Him, to connect to Him. But we all have situations or things that we must address before we do so. And God uses men like Nehemiah and Ezra to direct the Israelites back to the feet of God. And these men take action in clear and concise ways to take the Israelites strategically back to the feet of God. However, before any step of action can be taken, there needs to be an awareness of the problem. And sin has this nasty tendency to blind us to the gravity of our situation. And I've been there. There are moments we fall so deep into sin that we fool ourselves into thinking that it's not that serious. It's not that big of a deal. We think everything is fine just so we can cope with having to avoid, right, the weight of that situation. We become like a David who couldn't recognize his sin when the prophet Nathan threw it in his face. Or we become like a Solomon who says that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, but he wasn't wise enough to have that fear of the Lord, and he fell into temptation. Or we want to look so much like the world. We start thinking that its ways make more sense than the word. So we start compromising things that are non-negotiables, or supposed to be non-negotiables. And we fool ourselves into thinking we are in the right. We have a higher moral ground than the word. And to try not to appall our fellow Christians so much, we'll try to take the word and make it fit into our narrative, instead of letting the word shape our world. And that's the problem the Israelites had. They wanted to look like the world so much They wanted to be like them so much that they figured out who they were supposed to be. They forgot who God called them to be. A chosen nation, a holy nation, set apart. You are set apart. You are called by God. You are not like the world. You are not of this world. Don't pretend like you are. We can't play church. And you know, I listened to this debate the other day, and I think I talked about it with Mario a while back, and it was two different sides. Both of them professed to be Christians. One side was progressive, what they call now progressive Christianity. The other side was, more traditional, conservative, and they were talking about whether the word condemns homosexuality or not. And the progressive Christian got backed into a corner, and he couldn't really give any more good answers. And finally, he just admitted that, well, the Bible isn't the infallible word of God. I don't believe that it's the infallible truth. And that just blew me away. Like, why are we wasting our time? But, it's scary because we can get there without even realizing it. Where we don't hold this word to be our truth. We profess it to be our truth, but our actions don't speak to that. And so I think that we need to take initiative and be very aware, be very careful, especially nowadays, because it's so easy to begin to slip and start trying to make things make sense in your own head so you don't have to deal with the situation. And then when you read the word and approach it in that manner, you're just going to get what your itching ears want to hear. You're just wasting your time. God commanded the Israelites multiple times to not marry foreigners. And in the book of Joshua, which I'm going to read out of in chapter 23, verses 6 to 7, kind of gives a glimpse as to why. It says, "Be very strong, be careful to obey all that is written in the book of the law of Moses, without turning aside to the right or to the left. Do not associate with these nations that remain among you. Do not invoke the names of their gods or swear by them. You must not serve them or bow down to them." Every time the Israelites married with foreigners, they would begin to practice their customs and religions, and they would turn away from God. So now, understanding that, we can kind of get the frustration that Ezra has here. I mean, when I was reading at first, I'm like, yo, dude, relax. Like, this guy's tearing out his beard. Like, yo, chill out. But I believe it's got to be so frustrating to think that, man, we just spent all this time in captivity because of all of our screw-ups, generation after generation, and we're just coming back, and we're still screwing up. God has given us another chance, and we're failing him again. And I don't know if that sounds familiar to you, but I've been there. I've been in that hopeless situation where, like, I don't know what to do. God, you've given me opportunity time and time again. I feel like such a phony. Like, I just feel like giving up. And the situation just feels hopeless. But tonight, I want to say that don't give in to that hopelessness. And even if there are times where you feel fake, when you approach God in prayer, asking for forgiveness, don't stop doing it. Keep running back to God. Keep doing what you're doing. Because staying in that rut and getting comfortable with it is what the enemy wants you to do. Do what Ezra did. It says that Ezra wept bitterly over the sins of his brethren. And as a leader, he took accountability for their actions. So tonight, I want to implore you that we need to get to the point where we hate sin so much, we not only get troubled for our own sins, but for those who, the sins of those who surround us as well. And not just our friends either. But we should make it our business to be concerned with the salvation of everyone around us. hate the sin, but love the sinner. That's the common saying everyone says, but I feel like the picture of Christians nowadays is getting dangerously close to hating the sinner as well, or at least that's how I feel like people might think about us. And I've seen that picture a little too often nowadays, unfortunately. Doing that leads us into getting into fights with people instead of preaching the gospel. And this is something I had to work on because I found out that it's so easy to just bash somebody and call them dumb or stupid, but it's so hard to intercede in prayer on their behalf for their souls. And I don't know if anyone else has been there, but that's not a good place to be. That's not where God has called us to be as Christians. And I know we live in a world that's very inflammatory, very confrontational, if you don't agree with their ways. But I just want to encourage you guys to not give in to the provocations of the enemy, to not give in to whatever traps he might have for you. It's not worth fighting with people. It's not worth arguing with people. Have love, have patience. And you know what? If they get in your face, just walk away. You're not obligated to take whatever punishment they're giving you. You're not obligated to stand there and fight with somebody. Just do what God has called you to do and preach the gospel. Stop being so worried about being right. Just speak the truth. The word doesn't say we're saved by what we know or our intellect. We're saved by grace, through faith. And there's nothing I've done, at least, that's special to receive this revelation of truth. So my number one desire should be for everyone else to know that truth as well. Not to use it as a weapon to degrade or demean others. So our response should be like Ezra, to run to God in prayer for our mess-ups and to intercede on the behalf of other people as well. And we should be begging for God to open their hearts and for God to use us as vessels and as instruments to speak life to them. And I want to skip ahead to chapter 10, verses 1-4, where it says, while Ezra was praying and confessing, weeping and throwing himself down before the house of God, a large crowd of Israelites, men, women, and children, gathered around him. They too wept bitterly. Then Shekinah, son of Jehiel, one of the descendants of Elam, said to Ezra, we have been unfaithful to our God by marrying foreign women from the peoples around us. But in spite of this, there is still hope for Israel. Now let us make a covenant before our God to send away all these women and their children in accordance with the counsel of my Lord and of those who fear the commands of our God. Let it be done according to the law. Rise up. This matter is in your hands. We will support you, so take courage and do it. When our response to sin is genuine and we turn away from it and run to God and to his holiness, we testify to those around us of his great power and grace. God used Ezra to expose the gravity of their situation to the Israelites. And they're the ones that make the proposition of separating from their sin, no matter how painful it might be. And there are 3 things I want to go over real quick on how we should address sin in our lives. First, we must recognize the sin. Second, we must address it to God. And third, which is the hardest part, we must exercise our faith and take action against it. And by this point, I'm sure that you have to be thinking of certain things in your life. And maybe it's not sinful, but maybe it's holding you back. Certain things that God is calling you to surrender and to let go of. I'm going to urge you guys tonight to take action against those things. And stop expecting that a prayer is going to wish away all your problems. Because there is power in prayer. But if there is no action behind the faith, It's a dead faith. If there are no works, it's dead. So we have to take action. We have to take steps. If you're going to repent, you have to actively turn away. It's not just saying a prayer and like hoping that, okay, I'm just going to be better now. Like, you got to take steps. And you have to be wise. You have to have discernment. Do what you need to do to kill the sin that has taken root in your life. In reading this passage, you might think it is drastic what's being done here. And I'm not going to lie, I read this, I studied this, and I was a little uncomfortable at first reading this. It's tough because we're talking about families being separated. It's not an easy thing. However, you know what else seems extreme? When an unbeliever sees you divorcing from the world, or divorcing from fornication, or divorcing from alcohol, drugs, from sin that has taken a hold in your life. When you said yes to God and you turned away from the world, that seemed drastic to them, didn't it? And I think it's time for another drastic step. We can't be complacent. I don't know about you, but when I pass away, I don't want people to just say that I'm cool, or that I was funny, just say, catch that part, right? Just say. You can say it, but I don't want them to just say that I was funny or I was a cool guy. That's fine, that's dandy, but before all that, I want people to say that I was a man of God, that I didn't compromise the word for anything. So if I have to cut off certain friendships, which I have, I'm going to do it. If I have to turn down opportunities, which I have, I'm going to keep doing it. Because what matters at the end of the day is that I please God. It doesn't matter who I displease here on this earth, as long as I please God and I am aligned to his will. Because if God is for me, who can be against me? There is no good thing I have apart from God. And we all need to get to that point. And it's hard. It's easier said than done. There's a lot of temptations. There's a lot of material things that hold us back. But God is our one true source of life. And it's hard because a lot of us feel shame. A lot of us feel guilt. If you're too ashamed to take action for fear of what others may say, let them talk. The word says that God will destroy those who slander. A true believer will not kick you down. They will pray for you. They will encourage you, and they will help you get back up. And Pastor has said, and he said this, and it's a sad truth, that the church is the only army so quick to kill their own soldiers. And I see it every day on social media. We're more concerned about arguing about doctrines than we are about saving souls. Who cares about arguing about the gifts of the tongue? Who cares about that? There are people dying out there. Why are we wasting our time with these silly arguments? Let's be the authentic church. Let's not put those people who are in spiritual need down. And you know what? So what if people have to come to the altar every time there's a calling? At least they recognize their need. And if you're over here talking and slandering, you have failed to see your own need of God. Let's help build up. We're not called to destroy. Leave that to the enemy. We're here to build up. Ezra challenged the priests and the Levites to take the oath of rededicating themselves to the Lord because they were the leaders. So tonight's message is for the leaders as well. Maybe you're not drowning in sin, but maybe there is still something that the Lord needs you to address. And you've been putting it off to the side, hoping God would forget about it. Or maybe you've gotten to the point that you've become insensitive to the needs of others. And instead of building those around you up, you have been slandering. there is such a strong need for the body to love, not just on the people outside of these four walls, but we're called to love one another as well. We have such a strong need now more than ever for a unity in the body, to be one, to not be divided. My wife and I were at home yesterday, and we saw this live stream pop up on YouTube, like the recommended. And it was a live stream of the Osceola School District meeting that they hold once a month with all the board members. And I just like, oh, okay, let me see what they're talking about. I tune in, and apparently there's a bill. I'm not too well versed on it, so don't quote me, but apparently there's a bill that's been passed about establishing chaplains in schools now for the kids to be able to talk with them if there's any needs. And I saw person after person stand up to that podium and argue against it. I saw Satan worshipers standing up there talking, fighting for their cause. And I'm just so saddened because where are the Christians, man? I didn't see one Christian stand up there. It was so disheartening because they're so organized. They know what they're doing. One of the guys wasn't even from Florida. He came from out of state. He came from Massachusetts to speak at a county meeting. Like, seriously. Are we that dedicated to fight for our cause? It's tough, man. We have to be united. We have to be in one mindset because the enemy is out to destroy, and he is doing it. We can't be sitting back. We have to be organized. We have to be united because this is spiritual warfare. We don't just come here and dress up all good for Sundays and, raise our hands a few times and call it a day and, that's it. I'm a part of the church. I'm Christian. This is warfare. We ain't playing. This is warfare. Every day you wake up, you have to get ready for war. And that's something that, as a pastor, before I didn't really take that, too literally. I didn't see that as my life. But as I've grown and now that I'm a pastor, man, the devil is a liar, man. He is out there, man. He is active. We have to remain firm. We have to remain strong and united. We don't have time to be wasting fighting one another. We need to be united. Galatians chapter 5, verses 13 to 15 says, "For you were called to freedom, brothers. Only do not let your freedom become an opportunity for the flesh, but through love serve one another. For the whole law is fulfilled in one statement, namely, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. But if you bite and devour one another, watch out that you are not consumed by one another." I saw a quote today that really impacted me, and I'm gonna share with you. But heads up, this is 17th century King James speak right here, so I'm gonna translate it for you after. I'll read it, but I'll translate it for you guys after. "You think when a wrathful, envious heat is kindled in you against men for their fault, that it is certainly a zeal of God's exciting, but mark whether it have not more wrath than love in it, and whether it tend not more to disgrace your brother than to cure him, or to make parties and divisions than to heal them. If it be so, if St. James be not deceived, you are deceived as to the author of your zeal." And then he mentions James chapter 3, verses 15 to 16. "And it hath a worse original than you suspect." So I don't know if you caught that, but I'm gonna repeat it for you in my way. If it feels good, or it feels good to have a passion for truth and for God's ways, because it feels like we're being used by God. But take note of whether that passion is based more in love or in wrath, and whether it tends to heal or mend more than it does cause division. Because if it is in wrath and causes division, you are not being used by God. You are being used by Satan. James chapter 3, verses 15 to 16, which he mentioned. Such wisdom does not come down from heaven, but is earthly, unspiritual, demonic. For where you have envy and selfish ambition, there you find disorder and every evil practice. We need to take stock in our actions and why we perform them. We need to ask God to search and test our hearts for any iniquities, any ways that do not please him, so that we may be led back in the way of the everlasting. Lest we fool ourselves into thinking we're working for the kingdom of God, when in reality, we're helping out the kingdom of darkness. So tonight, whether you are in need or you've been insensitive to those in need, there's good news. Like I said before, God is a God of mercy, and there is nothing new under the sun. God is not surprised by your sin, and there is nothing about your situation that throws God off. He's seen it all, and he's conquered it all. So I ask again, how will you respond to that truth?